Cycles. Breaking the cycle of defeat with the cycle of victory. This is a very passionate thing for me, and people are very important to me. And the reason they are, many times as a preacher, we talk about here today, going tomorrow. I'm here to tell you that here today, going today is very important. If I can share a moment with you, just a little bit of a testimony I have. In 2007, I hit a car doing 45 miles an hour on my motorcycle. Leaving the base, music was blasting and everything was fine. I was rolling the car, pulled out of a store in front of me, and I never saw them, and they never saw me. The next thing I realized was when they would slide me on a helicopter and medevac me to Christiana Hospital. This brought to realization to me, here today, going today. This is according to the time that I was writing Cycles. This was a part of it as well, because it brought to life what was important to me. And what is important to me is my family and people. I began to understand more of why I was caught in this cycle. The cycle of taking one step forward and two steps backwards. And it seemed like as much as I tried to do the right thing, I was always finding myself in the wrong place. It brings to mind when Paul talks in Romans that, and I'm paraphrasing, I know what I do. I don't like what I do, but sin has control of me. O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me? As I was writing Cycles, it became a part of me where I started with, how are you living? And in that, it began to speak on how I'm truly living, the quality of my life. Not the quantity of my life, but the quality of my life. What is important to me? Yes, I like to have nice things just like anybody else, and I take care of what I have. I like to have the nice car, and all of that. But that's not what's important to me. What's important to me is holding my wife, looking at my children grow. My little grandbaby, when she was about 3 years old, 4 years old, every time I would come home, no matter where she was in the house, when she heard that door open, she'd come running, pop, 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 and she would leap, and I had to catch her. And when I bring her up and she nestled her arms around me, I felt more alive than the times. And I understand true love with no inhibition. That's what became important to me when I looked at how I was living. Because I made money and I spent money. I didn't have a problem going out to the club and spending a couple $100 having a good time partying and being the big man and setting up a few drinks here and there and stuff. I had no problems with that. But that wasn't truly living. I was only surviving. And we as a people do that. But we call it living. We call it having a good time. But then the after effects come into play. The quality of life. I remember when I worked at Chase, and this will speak so profoundly because I'm a pretty happy person. I'm a pretty lucky person in things and stuff like this. And one day I was up in the dining area and a man walked up to me and he said to me, and it struck me because I didn't know this man. And he said to me, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Excuse me?" He said, what's wrong? He said, I don't see the pep in your step. And at the time, I was going through something, but it didn't dawn on me that it spoke from my body that I was going through something, because I thought I was just my everyday self. But he said, something's wrong, because you don't seem to be the happy person, happy-go-lucky person that I see. And I told him, I said, oh, everything's fine. But when I walked off, it made me think. People are watching you. And as a man of God, I begin to understand that people know who I am and they're watching me. They're watching how I'm walking. It doesn't say that I don't have life situations on me, because I go through the same thing you go through. I have challenges and struggle the same that you have. But I really had to look at how I was living by what was important to me. It began to bring to light the things that I need to put emphasis in and to put focus in. I remember the time that I was going through something, and I couldn't talk to my wife about it. I couldn't talk to nobody. It was like a dark cloud was upon me. And the Lord spoke to my heart. Do not be consumed by your circumstances, but to stay focused in your purpose. He gave me the story of when Christ walked on the water. And that's a very familiar story, because he sent them over on the other side, and the storm was raging. And he started to walk on the water coming in. They saw him and became afraid. And Peter said, Lord, if that's you, because he spoke to him, he said, be not afraid, it's me. And Peter said, Lord, if that's you, bid me to come. And he said, come. And Peter stepped out of the boat onto the water, and the storm was raging around him. And Peter began to walk on the water, but he began to start focusing on the storm that was raging around him. And Peter began to sink. And when Christ grabbed him, he focused back on Christ, on his purpose. And he then again began to walk on his troubles. See, the Lord spoke that in my heart because of how I was living, what was important to me. I let other things be important to me that shouldn't have been important to me. And I find myself in situations and places at times, but I begin to focus back on how I should live. The next chapter that I wrote from that is, whom do you seek? It's very important to understand who you're following. I was talking to a couple young men who I was driving for, and they were in trouble, and I was listening to them as I picked them up from the trouble school and was taking them home as a transportation service. And I'm listening to these young men talk about what they're going to do this and they're going to go to college and do that. And I asked them a question. I said, what's your GPA? And they said, well, we don't have GPA, and started laughing. I said, well, how are you going to go to college if you don't have a GPA? But as I took them home, I was listening to these young men talk about what they're going to do with this young lady and how they're going to do that and all of this stuff. And the way that they talked about their homes, I thought they lived in shacks and whatnot, but these kids lived in beautiful homes. And when I was taking the ringleader home, I asked him that question, who are you following? He said, well, I'm not following nobody. I said, no, by what standard are you living by? See, I listened to you talk about all of this and what you're going to do in that. I said, look at the entertainment business. When you look at Tupac and Biggie Smalls, I began to talk to him about that. I said, where are they today? I said, people are getting rich off of them, but where are they? But what they were tied into took their life. I said, you know what's right and what's wrong. As I was driving him up to his house and I'm looking at this beautiful home, I said, your parents are working hard to do the best to provide for you as well. And you know what's right. Why do you keep doing what you're doing? And he looked at me. I said, you know what's right and you know what's wrong. Why don't you do what's right? And he looked and he said, I'm going to try. But see, I understand something. If he's not following the right thing, if he's not seeking the right thing, it's going to be very difficult for him to do that which is right. Because what is right? As I told one young man, there is a right and there's a wrong. You need to find what is right, and then it's your choice whether you're going to follow it or not. I had to make that decision for me and for my family. Because I'm the head of the family that's called on and charged by God to be the spiritual leader and the head and the provider of my family. But if I don't know what's true and what's right, how can I lead them and teach them right? Can I teach them off of my feelings and what I think? Or should I teach them according to what is true? And the only thing that I know to be true is the Word of God. Because it established a standard that we're to live by. And in that, and as I grow and mature in that, I'm seeking after Him. The next chapter that I talked about was the way of the world. The world is established and set up in a world system. A world system that goes contrary to what is true. Paul said it very well when he said, it may be lawful, but it's not expedient to me. It may be okay by the world standard and okay legally by the world standard for you to do this or for you to do that. But it's not okay by God's standard because of who He is. I used to tell my children that all the time when I was raising them, my boys. And especially my boys, my youngest son gave me most of my gray hair. But I used to tell them all the time, don't forget who you are. You're a sibling. I don't care what little Tommy down the street is doing, what his parents allowed him to do. But don't forget who you are. See, the way of the world is established. It established moral character by feelings, by wants and desires. And it says it's okay for you to do these things as long as you don't infringe on somebody else's right. But how many of you know, as I know, that we don't live in a bubble? That everything I do affects somebody. One way or another, it affects somebody. It affects my mother. It affects my wife. It affects my children. When I was out there, strung out, doing the wrong thing, that affected my household. That affected the income that I should be using for my family. I was using in the wrong manner. We all have different addictions. It's not all drugs. But how do I break that? How do I get away from them things? I have to begin to recognize the system that I'm operating in and understand the control that it has on me, or I allow it to have on me. And then the next chapter, tapping into your life source. When you're going through something, to be able to grow and gain what you need at the time you need it. I look at AAA. When a person has an alcohol problem, he go to AAA and he has to stand up and he says his name, introduce himself, and then he said, I'm an alcoholic. And then he worked through the process. See, when I had my drug addiction, I went to drug meetings and stuff, and I told them what they needed to hear because I thought I had it all right, and I was getting it on and everything, and I'm pretty cool, and you know, and I'm going through the program. But see, You have to have that mate, that person that stands with you, that when you're in that time of challenge, that you can call them and they can help you to work through it. But see, one day I fell on my knees and I said, Lord, help me. And the Lord looked at me and I imagine he said, now I can talk to you. I had a desire to stop. I had a desire to not do it anymore. Even it reminds me when I was smoking and I wanted to quit. And I began in my prayer saying, Lord, I can't do this by myself. I need you. I'll stop buying, but I need you to remove the taste, the temptation, and the desire to smoke. Well, I didn't buy for a little bit, but I started bumming. I lived next door to my brother-in-law, and we smoked the same cigarette. So I would go out like I'm going to the store, and I would bum a cigarette from me and walk to the store. But it was always in my prayer because I had a desire. Now, back in the day, they didn't have the patch and they had the gum, but they didn't have all this other stuff. They had counseling, and I went to a hit list one time, and that was the worst thing I could do. But I kept it in my prayer. Then I bought me a pack. Then I bought me another pack. I'm struggling. Then I kept it in my prayers and I stopped. And then one day I went to my brother-in-law's house and I said, hey, give me a cigarette. I'm going to walk down to the store. He said, okay, Paul, here. And I lit it up and I took 2 drags off of it, and it was the worst thing I ever tasted. At that moment, God took the taste from me. I threw it down. I was like, ah. I was being delivered. That was the last time I smoked, back in 1993. But what I had to do was I had to separate myself. Because at the same time I was beginning to grow in my ministry. I was beginning to grow in my relationship with him. And he was starting to strip some things off of me. He was starting to break some of them cycles that I have established in my life. That same year I quit drinking as well. I still struggle back and forth a little bit with drugs, but that didn't last long either. You know, and the day I knew that my life has changed, you know, us guys would get together on Monday Night Football and we're all around. They had some Jack Daniels and some different other drinks, and the game was on. You know, guys getting together, we talking about the women and this and that. And I felt like a fifth wheel. I got up and I walked out on the porch and I was sitting out there. I did not want to be there. It wasn't giving me no pleasure no more. And my brother-in-law walked out and he said, what's wrong? I said, I'm not feeling it. I said, I'll see you later. I'm going home. I didn't drink nothing. I went on home. But I was in church that Sunday and I felt good. I began to change my music. I began to change the things that I used to do. Some cycles was being broken. And it made it easier for me to tap into God when I was facing situations. I also began to notice doors opening for me that didn't open before. And in the next chapter, what do I do when I don't know what to do? And as I said before, we find ourselves in these dark places. We find ourselves going through something where nobody can help us out of. I believe that God lets us get into these places so we can rely on him and look unto him. I remember watching the movie $1 Million Baby with Clint Eastwood, and a young lady wanted him to be her coach, and she had a lot of life in her. She seemed to be a hillbilly, you know, but she had a spark in her. And he finally took her on, and he said one thing. He said, I'm going to give you one piece of advice. Always protect yourself. Then this girl was knocking people out. I mean, boom, boom. Every fight she fought, she was knocking them out. And she won an opportunity to fight the champ. The champ was known to be dirty. And this woman and her family was no good. Her parents, they was taking her money. When you look at her parents and you look at her, you see, how did this young lady come from these people? Because you saw everything negative in them and so much positive in her. It reminds me of so much of where we are and what's important. Well, this young lady makes it to the championship and she's whooping this champ. I mean, she was just beating her. And it was one of the rounds where the bell rang and Clint Eastwood put the chair in for her to sit down. When she turned her back, the lady hit her. And when she hit her, she fell and hit her head on the chair that was put in it and broke her neck. And she was not able to even, she was paralyzed from the neck down. And it was so bad that in the movie, she asked Clint Eastwood to kill her. And at the end of the movie, he did. Because she could not live like that no more. And what it brings into mind, that a lot of times when we get touched by God, we're ready to run. We have a lot of life, but we don't protect ourselves. And we leave ourselves open for the enemy to hit us in the wrong place. And in that, we become ineffective because we don't take the time to grow and mature in him. The sower of the seed said some seed fell by the wayside and the birds took it away. Some seeds fell among the thorns, upon stony ground. And when they grew, it had no depth of earth, so the roots couldn't go deep. And when the sun came out and scorched it, they withered away. Some of us, when we get the word of God and he touches our heart, we don't take the time to get rooted and mature in him, that when adversity comes, we're ready to go back to what we used to do. We become ineffective for what God has for us to do. See, a lot of times we think that it's about us and about where we're going and what we're doing. But if we take us out of the equation and to live for him, then we will begin to break those things that hold us. We become overcomers. And then we can move into. And we understand why and how we can go through our valleys. I'm not always going to be on my mountaintops. There's times that I'm going to go through things. But see, the Lord had made a promise because I gave him my life to him, that he's going to bring me out. That there's a blessing on the other side of through. That I'm going to come out of my dark place. See, some of you may be in that place right now. Money problems. You think you got it going on, but coming to God, you think things are going to change, that everything is going to become good. It's all going to be peaches and roses and all of that. But what you better understand is that when you come unto God, you done made an enemy of the enemy. And it's not if things are going to come against you, it's when it's going to come. And you need to take time to get mature. Because what do I do when I don't know what to do? I pray. And I have a connection unto God. Sometimes people talk about prayers bouncing off the ceiling. That's because they don't have that connection. But I know who he is. And sometimes all I can do is cry out. The last chapter, Living in Victory. If I can change all those things, how I'm living, and begin to turn my life to him, which will cause me to seek him, to be able to tap into my life source, to understand the way of the world because it goes contrary to God's word. I can discern things. I can discern what is right, and I can say, no, I'm not doing that. No matter how it looks. You ever heard of fool's gold? It glitters just like gold, but it's worthless. Why? Because it has no value to it. See, a lot of things attract us because it looks good. I remember when I was in high school and I was dating more than one young lady, and I'd be pushing one out the back door and one be knocking on the front door. And my mother said to me one day, she said, boy, everything that looks good is not always good. She was telling me I need to get my act together. I went to church, hear a good sermon, but I still got my party on. And even in my adult life, see, living for God and going to church is two different things because, see, all through the week, I can do my thing. Friday night, I'll be at the club partying, getting my party on. Saturday night, Sunday morning, I'm in church. Could be hungover, but I'm in church. So I got to feel good about myself because I go to church every Sunday. But the question has to be, are you living for Him? And I remember one Easter when my life had started to shift as well. The Lord said to me, if you believe in me, then why don't you live for me? And it struck me because that was a question. The question I would like to ask you, if you believe in Him, then why aren't you living for Him? Because to live in victory means to live for Him. And when I live for Him, all other things are going to come together. No matter how it looks, it still works to the good. No matter what's going on, it is still good. And I thank God for